And it's the same thing, like, let's say you live in a town, and you think the cops are crooked, and you decide to start a podcast about everything that goes on in your town. So you talk about the new sandwich that comes out of the deli, you talk about the cute waitress who just started working at Starbucks. That's kind of a creepy podcast. But you start talking about stuff in town, but as you're doing your podcast and you're exploring these parts of your town, you start to get glimpses of corruption in the local police department. But you don't always touch on it, you just kind of cover it here. And eventually you come across information that may be a little too close to home. Information that the police don't want people to know about. And then things start to happen to you. That's how I felt about this particular episode. I remember I recorded it, it was the end of season 5, and for that week where I wasn't doing any episodes, I was very nervous. I was very, very nervous. Now, did I expect like a van full of demons to pull up and throw me into the back of their van? No. But the topic makes me nervous. The topic makes me nervous. To me, it felt like recording this episode, it felt like I was seeing these things that I'd seen in my life, these demonic entities, and then I was telling the public about what I had seen. And that week off would be a perfect time to silence me, if they wanted to, right? So I've never re-listened to this episode. I've told these stories to people that I knew personally. I find the stories very disturbing to even really talk about. And, yeah, I can talk about ghosts, make fun of ghosts, and make fun of these crazy conspiracy theories and aliens and stuff like that. But when it comes to demons, there's almost like this... I don't even know how to put it, man. I don't know how to put it. But, This episode made me nervous. I was revealing some personal stories that I had seen and experienced, and that always kind of makes people nervous because you're revealing something about yourself. It made me nervous because I felt like I was exposing something that I believe is real. That obviously the fact that I had seen it and other people hadn't made me think that it wasn't supposed to be revealed in the first place. And here I am, airing it again as a repeat. So. Yeah, this episode really creeped me out, and hopefully it creeps you out as well as we listen to episode 256, The Demons Surround Us. Today is the end of season 5, and I wanted to record a special episode for you. It's July 4th, 2019. And what I want to talk about today is some real-life encounters I've had with demonically possessed people today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you're having a great day too. First off, apologies to people who listen to the podcast day of. You'll be realizing this episode is late. This episode is coming out late. It's 11:40 when I'm recording it right now. Now, I had recorded, this is the end of season 5, so I'm going to take a week off after this. And I had recorded a really cool episode, but I realized it was just a standard episode. And for the end of the season, I like to do something a little special. So I recorded the full episode and then went to celebrate the 4th of July. I hope everyone had a great 4th of July. It's one of my favorite holidays. Not a huge fan of the fireworks, but I'm a huge fan of America. And if you can't tell, I'm a little drunk. But it's really cool. I really like the 4th of July. So let's go ahead. I want to record this episode because I like to end the seasons with personal stories. This is going to be an interesting one, I think. Because we're going to talk about my interactions with demons and demonically possessed people. This is a collection of stories. But they're going to start, let's go ahead and start these. These are all fairly personal, and I may not feel super comfortable telling them. There may be a little bit of hesitancy, but I think they're really interesting stuff. And I think it'll inform you a lot about life, my life. So we're going to start off with my father. My father was a Southern Baptist minister. I grew up in the church. Actually, you know what? Let's even go farther back. Because I'm kind of winging this episode. I know what I want to talk about, but every so often I'll probably go off on a tangent. I don't know how many jokes are going to be in this episode because they're fairly personal stories. But my grandfather, he's passed away now. Cliff Miller. great man, great man. He's passed away. And he said that he always had the calling to be a minister himself, but he chose not to go that path. He was a country musician, and he was the foreman of a, because he retired and got nice benefits, and him and my grandma, they both passed away. I love them so much, but they both passed away. But it ended up working well for them. He retired, he had great benefits, great retirement, and he continued to play music pretty much up until a year or two before he passed away. He played at most of his grandchildren's weddings and most of his children's weddings and state fairs and stuff like that. Miller High Lives was the name of the country music. But what happened was he had a calling to the ministry, but he didn't want to go into the ministry. He resisted the call. And once my grandma told me this story, she said, you know, Grandpa felt compelled to join the ministry. He didn't want to. And he fought against it. And for the longest time, when he would sleep, he would dream of demons assaulting him, punishing him, after him, for not going into the ministry. Now, I don't think the demons were actually attacking him because he wasn't being a ministry. I think if anything, if it wasn't the dreams weren't based on the guilt of him not following the path that the universe set out for him. I think that it was more of a case that without being a minister, he would open himself up to these type of influences. Now, he was a good man. He never really did anything too wrong, raised us right. He was a good man. But those dreams haunted him for a long time. That's just a little foreword to the type of stories we're going to be talking about today. So my father becomes a Southern Baptist minister, and one of his first preaching assignments is at Colton Baptist Church, I believe was the name. It was in Southern California, where I spent a good chunk of my childhood. He was the main minister at Colton Baptist Church. And he said when he started there, he knew a man who he went to college with. So he went to California Baptist College in Riverside. That's where I grew up. And one of his friends who also went to CBC ended up being a deacon at Colton Church. And he asked, when he went there, his friend was no longer working there. And he asked one of the other deacons, hey, what happened to so-and-so? How come he doesn't work here? And his buddy goes, he saw something. He saw something in the church when he was here by himself. My dad's like, what? Deacon says, yeah, a good man. He's a good deacon. But one day he was in the church by himself and he saw something here and it scared him so badly he quit, never came back to the church. My dad's like, really? Like, I know the guy. He doesn't seem like the type of guy to do that. But the other deacon was like, yep, that's what happened. A couple months later, my father ran into his buddy who used to work at Colton. And he said, hey, man, he kind of joked about it. He goes, hey, so I heard something happened at the church and you quit. And my dad says, my friend's face went white. He's petrified. He put his hand on my father's shoulder and said, it's not a joke. You know me. I saw something there. See, Colton had, like most churches, had intricate stained glass windows all around the church. But at the front of the church, where the cross is, where the pulpit is, and all of that stuff, there's a large stained glass window. And the deacon said one day he was in there alone and he was praying. And he heard a noise. An unearthly noise. A noise that you shouldn't ever hear. It was the sound of glass shifting. Almost a noise that most of us wouldn't even be able to describe. These stories are 100% true as far as the fact that the people who told them I trust. And he looks up, the deacon looks up at the stained glass window. And it was just a pattern. There was nothing, there was no, as far as I can remember, because I went to the church all the time, there was no cross. It was just a beautiful collage of multicolored glass. But he said he looked up and he saw the glass shift. So stained glass windows, if you don't know, I guess I should say this real quick. It's multi-pieces of glass. There's like a little piece of like a metal embossing, and then there'll be like a blue shard, and then another piece like a yellow shard, and another piece of red shard, and there's always like these metal lines in between it. It was this multicolored glass. It wasn't a single piece. And he looks up, and he's watching the shapes of the glass shift. And within a few moments, there is a recognizable image. Now, before it was just a collage of multicolored glass. But as he's watching, and he's watching the shape shift, it makes the image, the unmistakable image of a serpent, symbolically a creature associated with the devil. Now, whether or not it became a serpent or it became a lollipop, the point of the story is that he watched something that is not possible physically happen in front of him. And not only that, it became an image associated with Satan, the adversary of God. He quit and never returned to Colton. My father is a very logical man. So even though a friend of his that told him this that he really trusts, he kind of brushed it off. Maybe a little bit of superstition. My father was the type of person who, generally in Southern Baptist households, they try to stay away from any iconography which can be associated with evil. One of those symbols is the owl. You will very rarely see portraits or statues or anything resembling an owl in the home of a Southern Baptist house. They consider that to be an evil omen. My father, because of that, bought a painting of an owl and hung it in our house. He is not a superstitious person. We always had a picture of a beautiful owl in our house. So he kind of brushed it off, but he continued to preach at Colton for the beginning of his career. But one day he comes home from work, and he tells my mom a story. We heard the story later, not immediately, but within the following weeks, he opened up to us. He said what happened was he was praying by himself in the church, and he heard a loud noise upstairs. Now, we're talking about Riverside. We're talking about Southern California. This was in the 1980s, so the gang epidemic was starting. My dad, at the same time, he worked at the church. He went to college. He also worked at Castle Park, which at the time was the world's largest arcade, as a security guard in Southern California. His job was, when gangbangers would come in, to hit him on the head with a nightstick. Totally different in the 1980s. People would come in wearing red, wearing blue, start mouthing off. He's not someone who tends to get scared. And I can tell you a ton of stories about my father in that type of setting. But he's praying in the church. He hears a noise upstairs. So his first thing is, this isn't a very good neighborhood. Someone must have broken into the church. So he goes upstairs and he starts looking around. He's totally alone in the church. Doesn't find anybody. It's like, okay. Must have been my imagination. He goes back downstairs. He's now in front of the pulpit and he's praying. He's meditating. He's thinking about what his next sermon's going to be. He's communicating with God. He hears the noise again. Sounds like someone's upstairs knocking stuff around. Now he knows there's no one upstairs. He checked the whole place out. There's no one up there. He knows what happened to his friend, the deacon. And he knows that part of being a minister is being distracted. He had always talked about distractions, things that are out to distract people who are on the path. And I'm sorry if this episode's a little Christian heavy, but I hope that you enjoy the personal story. So he continued to pray, and the noise would get louder and louder and louder. And it was the noise of someone banging stuff around upstairs. And no matter how much he prayed, no matter how much he focused on not getting distracted, the noise simply got louder. And he finally said, I have to find out the source of that noise. He stops praying, and the noise is continuing. He begins making his way through the church all alone. It was a 2-story church. Begins making his way through the church, and he hears the noise coming from the choir room. And he enters the choir room, and there is a closet full of robes. And he hears the noise, and it sounds like someone is just pounding against the inside of this closet. And he approaches it. He's walking towards the closet, and the noise is just getting louder and louder and louder. And he opens up the closet door, and everything goes quiet. There's nothing in there, but the robes are slightly moving. He continued to preach at that church. He didn't let that scare him away. But years later, I heard another story. This time we're going to shift to a story that my uncle had told me. My family's fairly religious. My uncle was out on a religious camp, a religious retreat with his church. And he said they were all sitting around the campfire. The minister, the minister's wife, the parishioners of the church, and my uncle. It's a beautiful night out. It's warm. You feel the Lord where you're at. You're around other people who believe in what you believe in. You are at peace. And the minister says, let's all close our eyes and bow our heads in prayer.